The crowd surged forward like scavengers, their voices rising with a terrible hunger. In the middle of the town square, on a wooden platform stained with the residue of years of trade, sat a small basket. Inside it, swaddled in rags barely fit to warm a pup, lay a black infant, no more than 6 months old. The auctioneer's voice sliced through the thick morning heat. "What am I bid for this child? Strong breed, good for field work in 10 years. $20, do I hear 20? He barked. Hands rose like weeds in a storm. Ragged men shouted over one another, treating the baby like he was nothing more than a beast of burden. The child's dark skin shimmered under the rising sun, his tiny fists flailing as he cried out in confusion and fear. Women in the crowd looked away, ashamed or helpless, but the bidding went on. At the outskirts stood a man who made the entire town uneasy, Silas Garrett, 45, tall and hard as sun-baked stone. Silas had carved a ranching empire out of the unforgiving land. He rarely spoke. He never smiled. And ever since a fever ripped his wife and young daughter from this world 5 years ago, he hadn't let anyone close. When the auctioneer's gaze found him, the bidding paused. "Mr. Garrett," he called, hope lighting his greedy eyes. "Surely you'll take a look at this fine little investment. Current bid is 35. The crowd held its breath. Silas always bought the best workers, paid in gold and silence. Everyone expected him to make the winning bid. That was the way of things. The powerful took what they wanted. And Silas Garrett was power made flesh. He didn't speak right away. He stared at the baby. Something ancient and wounded flashed through his expression, too quick for the crowd to name, but real enough to silence even the auctioneer. Then, "No," Silas said, voice flat as the plains. "I won't bid." The town square erupted into murmurs, shock, confusion, disbelief. The auctioneer hesitated, hammer frozen midair. "But sir," he stammered, "surely you see the value." I said no. Silas turned his horse with slow precision and rode away, the dust from his boots choking the whispers behind him. Some called him soft, others figured grief had finally eaten through his mind. But at the edge of the square, a woman in a faded blue dress watched him go. Dina Ross. She'd been waiting for this moment longer than anyone could have guessed. The infant's cries rose again, louder than before. Silas didn't turn around, but he had no idea that with that single refusal, he'd set something in motion. Before dawn the next day, 50 riders would arrive at his gates, and the walls he'd built around his broken heart would be tested like never before. He rode hard toward his ranch, his silence louder than any judgment. The town's whispers clung to him like the dust in the air, but beneath them all, one sound clawed at his memory: the wail of that helpless baby. It tore open wounds he thought he'd buried, reminded him of another cry, another voice he hadn't been able to save. His ranch loomed in the valley, vast and lonely. Cattle grazed in the distance, and the big house stood hollow, stripped of warmth or laughter. No little feet ran across its floorboards now. No voice called him Pa. The emptiness was both punishment and penance. But something was wrong. As Silas dismounted, he spotted fresh hoof prints in the dirt, not just 1 or 2 dozens, circling, watching, like wolves around a campfire. He retrieved his rifle and walked the perimeter. The tracks weren't random, they ended at lookout points, each one with a clean view of his home. They'd studied him. They knew his habits, his blind spots. As the sun dipped toward the western hills, he caught movement in the tree line. A figure, on horseback, then another, then a third. They made no attempt to hide. They wanted to be seen. His grip tightened on the rifle. No one had dared step on his land uninvited in years. His reputation had kept people away. But these riders moved with purpose, like soldiers, not wanderers. Then from the trees emerged a single figure, the woman in the faded blue dress, Dina Ross. She stopped just short of rifle range and called out, her voice steady, sharp, and full of history. "Silas Garrett, we need to talk. Get off my land," he shouted back, raising his weapon. "Whatever you want, you won't find it here." She didn't flinch. "We want the same thing you wanted when you said no today. That child doesn't belong in chains. Neither do we." Her words hit like a blow to the gut. How did she know? How could she see through the shell he'd become? You don't know anything about me. I know you're the only one who looked at that baby and didn't see property, she said. You saw a soul, and you remembered what it means to be human. From the shadows, more riders emerged. 10, 20, then 30 more, all black, all watching him with weary, watchful eyes that had endured too much. But in their gaze wasn't just pain. There was something else. Hope. Dina called out again. Sunrise changes everything. You can face it alone, or you can face it with us. But one way or another, what started in that square doesn't end until that baby is safe. Then they disappeared into the dusk, like ghosts carried off on horseback, leaving Silas alone with a house full of rifles and a heart full of turmoil. He couldn't sleep. He paced the creaking floors, checking his weapons, glancing out windows, every sound in the dark sending tremors up his spine. Dina's words wouldn't leave him. How could she know what that moment in the square had done to him? How could she know the sound of that child's cry had pulled him back through time, to his own child's final days? The fever, her tiny fingers clutching his, the way her breath rattled, weaker with each passing hour. He'd sworn never to care again, never to love again. Love made you weak. Love left you broken. But now, he wasn't sure. Just before dawn, Silas climbed to the roof. He wanted to see what was coming. What he saw froze the blood in his veins. From every direction, over the hills, through the trees, across the valley came riders. Dozens of them, 50 at least, men and women on horseback, riding like they had nothing left to lose, riding like they'd already lost everything once and wouldn't do it again. And they were riding toward him, not to kill, but to stand, to fight, to remind a hardened man of the humanity he'd buried with his daughter. And as the first light broke over the horizon, Silas Garrett finally understood. The war that was coming wasn't just over one baby, it was for the soul of everything he thought he'd left behind. Precision guided the riders to his ranch. At their head was Dina Ross, not as a lone figure this time, but as a leader of what appeared to be an army. And yet, this was no war march. As they neared, Silas Garrett saw not rifles or blades, but hands carrying shovels, hammers, rope, and supplies. Whatever they intended, it wasn't destruction. They stopped in a perfect semicircle around his house, close enough for voices to carry, but far enough to show they meant no harm. Dina dismounted, her hands raised and empty as she stepped forward. Alone, Mr. Garrett, she called up to him on the roof where he stood, rifle in hand. We're not here to fight. We're here to offer something you haven't had in 5 years. His voice was still laced with skepticism, but the barrel of his rifle now pointed downward. And what's that? A chance, she said, loud and clear, to save a life, instead of watching one slip away. The words cut through him like a blade. He scanned the faces in that circle. Each one carried the kind of grief that doesn't fade. Mothers who had buried children, men whose backs bore the scars of cruelty, eyes that had watched families torn apart. They weren't strangers to pain. They wore it, lived it. That baby from the auction, Dina said, voice steady but burning, was sold to Marcus Webb. Silas's jaw clenched. Webb was a name drenched in cruelty, a man who worked children in his fields until they collapsed. That infant won't see his second birthday if we don't act, she added. Silas felt a familiar ache in his chest. Webb was everything he despised, a man who saw suffering as a transaction. By noon, Dina continued, we ride to his ranch to take that child, and we want you with us, not for your rifle, not for your wealth, because that baby needs someone who knows what it means to fight for family. The sun rose higher, burning into the decisions yet to be made. Silas stood at a threshold he hadn't dared approach in half a decade. He climbed down from the roof, boots hitting the earth harder than expected. The circle parted slightly to make room. You're talking about stealing from Marcus Webb, he said, approaching Dina. That makes you outlaws. That makes me an outlaw too if I go with you. We prefer the term liberators, she replied with a grim smile. And you're already an outlaw, Mr. Garrett. The moment you didn't raise your hand at that auction, you broke ranks with a system that treats babies like livestock. Silas looked at the faces once more, wrinkled, scarred, defiant. They weren't asking him to commit a crime. They were inviting him to remember how it felt to be human. Webb's got 12 armed men on his property. He warned, "You're planning a bloodbath." "Maybe," Dina admitted, "but that baby's already dying slowly. Sometimes a quick death is kinder than what he's enduring." The memory hit Silas like a hammer to the ribs, holding his daughter's tiny, fevered body, whispering promises he couldn't keep, praying for mercy that never came. "There might be another way," he said suddenly. "Webb's a businessman before he's anything else. He responds to money, to pressure. What if we make keeping that child too expensive?" Dina's eyes sharpened. "Go on." "He depends on my cattle to supply beef to half this territory. If I cut him off, threaten to destroy his contracts, his profits disappear. He might let the child go to protect his margins. That's a thin thread," Dina warned. "What's to stop him from running or calling in the law?" For the first time in years, Silas felt the stirrings of something dangerous, hope. It tasted like terror. "If I do this," he said, "there's no going back. If I fail, that baby suffers. If I succeed, I have to care again." "Mr. Garrett," Dina said softly, stepping closer, "we're all afraid. But fear is just love with nowhere to go. That baby deserves someone who will fight for him the way you wish. Someone had fought for your daughter." Silas looked behind him, at the empty house that had become a tomb. Then he looked ahead at the people who carried grief like badges of honor. He knew this moment would define him. "I'll go with you," he said, voice calm but tight with emotion. "But we do this smart. No guns unless he forces our hand. We try to talk first." Relief surged through Dina's expression like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. These people had been ready to charge into death rather than let one more innocent suffer. Within moments, they were riding. Silas rode beside Dina, wind pressing against his chest like a challenge. And for the first time in years, he felt something more powerful than sorrow. Purpose. As they rode, he turned to her. "How did you know about my daughter? The way you looked at that baby," she answered quietly. "Same way I looked at my son before they sold him south. 15 years ago. Some pain only other broken parents can see." Silas didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence between them said everything. As they crested the final hill, Webb's ranch came into view. It looked less like a home and more like a war camp. Watchtowers, armed guards, rigid patrols. "Jesus," someone behind them whispered. "How do we get past that?" But Silas was already analyzing. The defenses were solid but only for a frontal assault. "Dina," he said, "take half the group to the north pasture. Make yourselves visible. Make him think you're there to stampede his herds. And the rest, stay with me." We walked straight up to his front door. Murmurs rippled through the group. Was he insane? Bold? Both. "Webb knows me," Silas said. "He'll listen, especially if he thinks there's profit in it. While I'm inside, I'll find that baby and see what options we've got. And if he shoots you where you stand," Dina asked, her voice tight, "then you'll know talking's over," Silas answered, deadpan. As the group began to split, he felt the familiar weight of leadership fall across his shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. This time, he wasn't carrying it alone. 50 people were counting on him to do what he'd failed to do 5 long years ago: save a child's life. As the sun reached its zenith, Silas rode steadily toward the iron gates of Webb's estate, the weight of past failure pressing against his spine like a ghost refusing to be forgotten. Redemption or ruin awaited him within the hour. The guards at the front recognized him instantly. His name still carried weight: Silas Garrett, the prosperous rancher, the man who had built an empire from dust. That name opened gates that should have stayed shut. Within moments, he was inside the courtyard, boots crunching against gravel, his hands visible at his sides while his eyes darted to every shadow that might hide a gun or worse. Marcus Webb emerged from the main house with the fluid grace of a spider sensing vibrations in its web. Tall and slender, with eyes like winter glass and a smile that knew no warmth, Webb's presence reeked of danger. His clothes were stitched in wealth, but his soul was threadbare. He positioned himself between Silas and the door, a silent signal that no one passed without his permission. "Silas Garrett," he said with a cool drawl, extending a hand like a serpent offering a deal. Silas took it briefly, reluctantly. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Business, Marcus. Silas replied, his voice flat, steady. Always business. Webb's smile curled wider. Predatory. Ah, the infant. Smart investment. In 10 years, he'll be worth 10 times what I paid. Assuming he survives, of course. The indifference in his tone scraped like sandpaper across Silas's nerves. He clenched his jaw to keep his expression steady. That's actually why I came. I've got a proposition you might want to hear. Webb's eyebrows lifted. Let's talk inside. The door creaked open and swallowed them in. Somewhere, deep in the house, a baby's cries filtered through the thick walls, faint, but unmistakably real. Silas's heart seized at the sound, but he forced his face into neutrality. The child was still alive. That meant there was still a chance. Webb led him to a study soaked in wealth and calculation. Shelves overflowed with ledgers, contracts, and records that turned flesh and bone into columns and profit margins. On the desk rested a half-drunk glass of whiskey and a pile of recent sales slips. One bore yesterday's date. So, Webb said, settling behind his desk like a man used to playing God. What's this proposition? I need hands for the spring cattle drive, Silas began. Young ones. Easier to train. I'll pay premium top dollar for healthy stock. Webb leaned in, interested. And the infant, I'll take him. 2, triple what you paid. And for the next 5 years, you get first pick of my cattle. Below market. It was too much generosity. Silas knew it. Webb knew it. The suspicion in the man's eyes flared sharp. Why that child? He asked, his voice dropping low. Plenty of others to choose from. Silas was ready. Fresh stock breaks easier. No habits to unlearn. And I heard he's strong. Despite everything, as if summoned, the baby's wailing swelled. Louder now. Panicked. Footsteps echoed somewhere above. A reminder that life in this house went on even as one tiny soul screamed for help. Webb stood and wandered to the window, staring out at his estate. Guards, guns, control. You know, I've been hearing things about you, Silas, he said. About what happened at the auction. About riders showing up near your land. Cold prickled down Silas's back. Webb had caught wind of the rescue attempt. I'm a rancher, he said coolly. That's all. Is that so? Webb turned, and the charm peeled off like dead skin. His eyes burned now, because to me, it looks like you're running some kind of underground railroad. And that makes you dangerous, very dangerous. Then, the worst sound of all came. The baby's cries stopped. Silence replaced it, hollow and final. Webb's voice cut through the air like a blade. Here's my offer. You walk out now, and I don't have my men put a bullet in your back. You ever show up again, and I'll make sure that child dies slow while you watch. Every instinct screamed at Silas that he'd walked into a trap. Webb had planned this. He'd baited the hook, then waited for the bite. But Silas had survived. Too many winters, too many ambushes to collapse now. He'd learned how to keep breathing in the middle of a war zone. Webb expected him to flinch, to beg, to fold under pressure. But Silas was not like other men. You're right, Marcus, he said, stepping closer to the desk. I am dangerous to men like you, but not the way you think. Webb's hand drifted to the pistol holstered at his hip. Silas didn't flinch. His tone remained calm, unshaken. You've built everything on fear, Silas said. You isolate people, keep them scared, alone. That's how you keep control. But what happens when they're not alone anymore? From outside, voices rose in a swell. Urgent shouts echoed through the courtyard. Webb spun toward the window and saw it. Dina's group wasn't hiding anymore. They were advancing, and they weren't alone. Appearing on every horizon, they came streams of riders and wagons moving swiftly from all directions, converging like a storm toward Webb's stronghold. What the hell? Webb muttered, stepping back. But Silas cut him off. Word spreads. Quick around here, he said calmly. 50 folks came to my ranch this morning, but they didn't come straight here. They stopped at every farm, every shack, every little outpost where good people still hold the line. Turns out, you've made more enemies than you ever counted. From deeper inside the house, the baby cried out again, louder now, joined by new sounds, doors creaking open, hurried footsteps, alarmed voices echoing through narrow halls. Webb's private empire was under siege not by soldiers, but by a rising tide of ordinary men and women who had simply had enough. This is mutiny. Webb snarled, yanking a pistol from his coat. I'll see every last one of you strung. Up for this, maybe, Silas said evenly. But first, you'll need to survive it. Just then, the front door slammed open. Dina Ross charged in like a thunderclap, 3 riders flanking her, righteous fire in her eyes. She didn't stop to ask permission, just marched straight through Webb's house, like it belonged to her. Where's the baby? She barked. Webb raised his gun toward her, but he never got the shot off. Silas, hardened by years of ranch work, moved like lightning. He slammed into Webb, sending both of them crashing into the desk. Glass shattered, papers flew, and the weapon skidded across the wooden floor. From upstairs came a shout. Second room on the left. Dina didn't wait. She flew up the stairs, boots pounding, taking 3 steps at a time. Silas wrestled Webb to the floor and held him there, his chest heaving, through the broken window. He watched as the last of Webb's guards handed over their weapons to the gathering crowd outside. The fortress had fallen without a single shot fired. Moments later, Dina reappeared, cradling a small bundle in her arms. The baby was thin, far too thin but alert. His eyes sparkled with life. He's alive, she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. It's over, Silas said, rising to his feet. This ugly game you've been playing ends now. But Webb only laughed, a bitter, hollow sound, soaked in venom. You fools think this changes anything, he rasped. You think rescuing one damn baby makes you heroes. There are 100 men like me out there. You've just picked a fight with all of them. Silas looked down at him, bloodied, beaten, yet still full of poison, and felt something shift inside him. A peace he hadn't known in years settled over him, not the cold peace of isolation. A deeper kind, one born of standing for something greater than himself. You're right, he said. There are 100 of you, but today there are 100 of us who said no more, and tomorrow, maybe 100. A week from now, 1,000. Outside, the once disparate crowd moved with newfound unity. Former slaves worked shoulder to shoulder with white farmers. Native Americans rode alongside Mexican vaqueros. What had begun as a desperate rescue had become something much bigger, a coalition that defied every boundary this land had drawn. Dina gazed down at the baby, still holding him close. What's his name? She asked softly. Webb spat blood. Name? He's property. Property don't need names. Then we'll give him one, Silas said firmly. He studied the boy's eyes, so bright, so alive, and thought of another child, a child he had lost. Samuel, he said. His name is Samuel. The baby let out a small gurgle, as if in approval. In Dina's arms, he no longer looked like something owned, he looked like hope. As they rode away from Webb's estate, Silas realized just how much had changed since sunrise. Those 50 people who had appeared at his gate had torn down more than a house. They'd torn down a way of thinking. He glanced at them now, riding together with quiet determination. Strangers no longer, they were something new, something whole. Dina rode beside him, Samuel wrapped in her arms. He'll need a family, she said. Someone to raise him, to love him. Silas looked back at his ranch, once empty, once silent. Now it was filled with the sound of riders, of laughter, of life. He looked at the faces around him. Maybe he doesn't need just one family, he said. Maybe he needs all of us. So Samuel became something no one had expected, the first child of a community, built not by blood, but by choice, a place where no human being was ever again treated as property. A place that chose courage over silence, love over cruelty. Dina moved into Silas's home to help raise the boy, and in time, others came too. One by one, the lonely ranch transformed into a haven, a home, a symbol of what happens when people decide enough is enough. Webb had been right in one way. They had declared war, not with guns, but with unity, with decency, with the unshakable truth that the human spirit, when finally pushed too far, will always rise. Years later, when Samuel was old enough to understand, Silas would tell him the story about a dawn that brought 50 people to one rancher's gate, about how those people stood together and changed the world. He'd tell Samuel that the biggest victories often start with the smallest acts, That family isn't who you're born. Two, it's who shows up when it matters. And somewhere, in that same yard where silence once reigned, Samuel would laugh and run and grow, a child born from resistance, raised by courage, protected by love, because on that day, a rancher found his purpose, a broken land found its voice, and a baby named Samuel found something beyond price, a place to belong.